To understand what was going on in Italy in 1934, you need to understand the man who was in charge of the country, Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini was an Italian politician and journalist who founded and led the National Fascist Party. He was Prime Minister of Italy from the March on Rome in 1922 until his deposition in 1943. Mussolini inspired and supported the international spread of fascist movements. Though originally a member of the Italian Socialist Party, Mussolini moved towards fascism after a stint in the army. His father was a socialist and had named him after Benito Juarez, the liberal president of Mexico. Ironically though, he turned into something that wasn't comparable with many other leaders before his time. Mussolini would go on to establish a dictatorship in Italy through both legal and illegal means, and Italy was soon transformed into a one-party dictatorship, just like in Argentina in 1978, as we discussed in previous videos. Italy was led down a dark and dangerous path, where one man and one party had a dangerous amount of unquestioned power over society. Mussolini aimed to restore old ideas of imperialism with his foreign policy, seeking to extend colonial Italy and fascism in the process. He sought to take the voice of the opposition away and put Italy on a global pedestal thanks to his own romantic ideas of empire. During his reign, Italy bombed Greece, robbed land in Libya, went to war with Ethiopia, and fought with General Franco's fascist forces in Spain's Civil War. They even took the side of the Nazis in World War II. Mussolini entered the war on the Axis side, the side of the Nazis that were fighting against the Allies, including the US, France, and Britain. Despite initial success, the Axis side would ultimately be defeated. This included an invasion of Sicily that threatened many locals. The Italian people started to lean towards the idea that they were fighting a losing battle, and so Mussolini lost most of his support, and he soon lost his role as head of the government too. Mussolini was placed into custody by the King of Italy, but he would later be rescued by German paratroopers, and Adolf Hitler gave him a new role as the head of the Italian Social Republic, a movement in the north of Italy and the brainchild of Hitler. This led to the Italian Civil War, and on the cusp of defeat, Mussolini attempted to flee Italy with his mistress. They were caught on the road, however, by left-wing partisans and executed, hung upside down from a petrol station for their fate to be shown to the public. The second World Cup ever held was awarded to Italy, a country that in 1934 was in the middle of a fascist dictatorship led by Mussolini and his infamous army of black shirts. The black shirts were the paramilitary wing of Mussolini's fascist movement, named of course after their black uniforms. Mussolini's 12 years in power had been repressive and violent. Political enemies were murdered, and many citizens that were overheard muttering disapproval would soon disappear. Like in Argentina in 1978, the leaders of Italy in 1934 saw the World Cup as the perfect sports-washing event, the perfect piece of propaganda that could detract from the ongoing national atrocities and save face in the global eye, whilst trying to unite the folks at home in a grand show of blind nationalism. The World Cup being held in Italy was intended to serve as a great display of strength, particularly in the fascist society that Mussolini had been building. A vindication that his path was the best one for the country. Italy's ultimate challenger in hosting the World Cup was Sweden. The Scandinavians seemed a far more favourable option to host the global event, but it wasn't to be for them. Why might that have possibly occurred? Allegedly, FIFA were informed by Mussolini's men no less that the state would harbour any financial burdens of hosting the competition. There were also a few more unsavoury rumours that bribes and intimidation were taking place as the Italians did their utmost to win the sparkling prize of hosting the competition. These rumours are hard to prove, but just like we said of Argentina in 1978, if a regime is shameless enough to dictate and murder, then why would it be strange of them to bribe a few FIFA officers? The games were awarded to Italy, and the Azzurri would go on to win their first ever World Cup. They now of course have 4 titles. Only Brazil with 5 have won the competition more times. With the prize of hosting the tournament too began the propaganda. Fascist slogans and symbols were woven into the 1934 World Cup marketing, and Mussolini even famously queued up alongside the public in order to purchase a ticket for the opening game. Mind you, as you might have imagined, he sat in the royal box instead of with the public. On the very subject of tickets, many of the games did not sell out, but were always reported as being full to capacity, as Mussolini's propaganda machine kept on producing as he would have wanted. Football again had been hijacked. The sport that grips people and nations is therefore so attractive and vulnerable to the wrong type of people. 300,000 posters were printed and pinned to walls and buildings across the country. New stadia were constructed and current stadia given a facelift, as the world would be rolling into town. The stadium in Turin that would host games was even known as Stadio Benito Mussolini. In glorious hindsight, it was so obvious that this World Cup had all the trappings of a well-oiled propaganda machine. On the field of play, Italy's success would not be questioned, quite like Argentina's dodgy road to victory in 1978. But they were thought to have benefited from some ridiculous refereeing nonetheless. After all, it can't be a sports-washing activity without a few dodgy decisions. Reports suggest that in an especially ferocious quarter-final clash with Spain, the Italians were lucky to have the officials on side. This quarter-final clash was so ferocious that it had to be decided by a next-day replay after a 1-1 draw. And due to a hotly contested game and plenty of injuries, just 4 of the Spanish starting 11 were available for the follow-up game that Italy won 1-0 the next day. Italy also defeated the USA 7-1 in their opening fixture in the round of 16. Back in those days, the World Cup took the form of a straight knockout tournament. There was no group phase. In fact, it is one of the many World Cup tournament models we have seen over the years, from double group stages to the proposed 48-team tournament coming in 2026. What's your favourite format? Anyway, back to the sports washing. In the semi-finals, Italy beat Austria, and in the final, despite going 1-0 down late on to Czechoslovakia, they came back to be crowned champions of the world with a 2-1 victory. A glorious home victory for the fascist one-party state in the eyes of Benito Mussolini. There were many stories told of brutal officiating in the semi-final where Czechoslovakia defeated Germany. The idea being that the Italian referee wanted an easier final for Italy, and the Czechs were seen as the better option. The Czechs would ally with the USSR, and their communist regime was the complete opposite of Mussolini's fascist belief system. So in a way, this was more than just a football game, but also a battle between the extreme left and right. Mussolini may have feared a defeat before the game even more for this reason, but in the end, he would have been even more delighted that this was the opponent the Azzurri would beat to win the trophy. To the credit of the Italian players, they also won a World Cup 4 years later in 1938, so let's not take away from the football on the pitch. One of the famous Italian talismans from that tournament was the name you might have heard, Giuseppe Meazza. That's right, it's the official name of what we now know as the Stadio San Siro. The result was exactly what Mussolini wanted. Again, similarly to his Argentinian counterpart that would later be the next dictator to hold a World Cup win in 1978, the Italian leader bought time with this facade. More importantly, he drew attention away from behind-the-scenes violence being undertaken by his one-party police state. He also succeeded in galvanizing some more support, as his fascist nation now had a World Cup. What better show of national power and pride than a World Cup win? It can do crazy things to people, and Mussolini had dubbed this World Cup the People's Cup in Italy. Commentators remarked on the radio that workers came from far and wide to watch their heroes win in the name of the nation and the one-party state, as huddled masses lucky enough to get their ears near a radio in Italy would listen on, vulnerable to a false sense of national pride in times of true darkness. In conclusion, Italy 1934 is another stained tournament in the history of FIFA World Cups. Anybody who thought that the Qatar 2022 tournament stood alone as a questionable choice may stand corrected. Though not quite as infamous as the tournament of 1978 in Argentina, 1934 served the exact same purpose for Benito Mussolini and the fascist Italy that he had dreamed up and put into practice. Were you aware of the dark history of tournaments like this? Then be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next video in our series of monumental sports washing events.